You need to move to the back, the flight attendant snapped, her voice slicing through the cabin. Jalen stood still, phone in one hand, boarding pass in the other, as passengers began pulling out their phones, recording, whispering, waiting. And just before everything spiraled further, he calmly said, "Then I guess it's time I call my uncle, the civil rights attorney." At 17, Jalen Carter didn't care much for drama, especially not on travel days. He was just trying to get home. Spring break in Fresno hadn't been some grand adventure. No beaches or parties. It was quiet, intentional. A week of grocery runs, sitting beside his grandmother as she tried to figure out how to use her new TV remote, and watering the garden while she napped in her recliner. Nothing big. Nothing loud. Just family. His mom had smiled when he told her he'd go instead of staying home in New Orleans. "It's good to show up for people," she'd said. That's what he'd done. And now all he wanted was to board his connection from Fresno to Denver, then home. Quiet flight. Headphones in. Look out the window and think about nothing. He liked window seats for that exact reason. His boarding pass said 12F. He hadn't paid for seat selection, but somehow got lucky. Small win. The airport was calm. Fresno Yosemite wasn't a circus like LAX or Atlanta. Just a handful of gates and sleepy announcements echoing over the intercom. Jalen moved through security with ease, backpack slung over one shoulder, hoodie halfway zipped, and earbuds tucked in his collar. He got to Gate 7 a few minutes before boarding. The gate agent didn't smile, but that wasn't new. Jalen smiled anyway, his grandma's voice in his head, "Always carry yourself better than what they expect." He did. He always tried. Boarding was called, and he lined up when Group 3 was announced. As he stepped down the jet bridge, a soft pit opened in his stomach. Not fear. Just off. Something in the air. Not the usual flight nerves. Just one of those moments you feel but can't explain. Jalen scanned his boarding pass and stepped onto the plane. He nodded politely at the flight attendant at the front. She didn't return the gesture. Okay, then. He kept moving. Row 12 was near the middle of the plane. He glanced at the row numbers, adjusted his grip on his backpack, and stopped when he reached it. But someone was already in his seat. A man, older, maybe late 50s, with graying sideburns and thick headphones on, was slouched comfortably in 12F. Jalen paused. Checked the seat again. Checked his boarding pass again. Still said 12F. A window seat. He leaned slightly toward the man, considered speaking, but the guy looked half asleep, and Jalen didn't want to poke the bear. Instead, he turned and caught sight of a flight attendant coming up the aisle. Blonde, hairpin tight, silver wings on her name badge. Brenda. He could see it from where he stood. "Excuse me, ma'am," Jalen said, voice steady and respectful. "I think there's someone in my seat. I'm assigned 12F. She barely glanced at him. "That's not your seat," she snapped. Not questioned. Not curious. Stated. Jalen blinked. "It is, that's what's on my boarding pass." There was a change, she cut him off. "You've been reassigned. You need to move to the back." "I didn't hear about any change." "Don't argue with me," she said, voice sharp now. "I don't care what you think it says. Sit where you're told." The surrounding passengers shifted. Heads turned slightly. A few people peered up from their phones. No one said anything. No one ever does, at first. Jalen felt the heat rise in his chest, not from anger. From something colder. Shame. Like he'd done something wrong just by existing where someone thought he didn't belong. He tried again, holding out his phone with the airline app still open. "It says 12F right here." "Look." She didn't look. Arms crossed now, chin lifted. "Are you refusing to follow a flight crew member's instructions?" "No, I'm just asking you to check." "That's a federal offense," she snapped louder this time. Too loud. Passengers in nearby rows looked up. Someone started recording. Jalen inhaled slowly, then exhaled. He wasn't new to moments like this, he just hoped this flight wouldn't be one of them. He pulled out his phone, turned away from her, and scrolled to his contacts. One name, Uncle Andre. He tapped it. The call rang once. "Jalen," came the calm, clipped voice. "I need you," Jalen said softly. "Tell me everything." The flight attendant bristled. "Is that a phone call? You can't use your phone during boarding." "I'm speaking with my attorney." That made her blink. Only for a second. "Attorney? Who's your attorney?" From the phone speaker, clear and cool, Andre Carter. "Civil rights. You may want to pause before you escalate this any further." She didn't answer. Didn't ask questions. Instead, she turned toward the front of the plane and barked into her walkie. "We have a passenger refusing to comply. I need someone removed." A quiet ripple moved through the plane. Jalen heard it. So did everyone else. A few murmured. One woman across the aisle leaned toward her husband and whispered too loud to ignore, "He's not even in the seat." Another voice, "She didn't even check his boarding pass." Jalen stood still. Phone in one hand. Pass in the other. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't demand. He just stood. From the row behind him, an older black woman leaned forward, speaking clearly. I saw him ask her politely. She jumped on him. "Ma'am, please don't interfere," Brenda shot back. "Not this time," the woman replied. Jalen turned slightly toward the phone. "Uncle Dre, people are recording." "Good," Andre said. "Let them. Tell them to keep filming. Stay calm. I'm contacting the airline's legal department." "What's the flight number?" Jalen looked above the seat. "Blue 2841. Fresno to Denver." "Got it. Do not say anything else to her." Brenda was still talking into her walkie, her eyes flicking back and forth like she was losing control of a situation she thought she had handled. Another flight attendant, older, softer demeanor, stepped forward. His badge read Luis Moreno. "Hey, son," he said quietly, not unkindly. "Can I see your boarding pass?" Jalen handed it over wordlessly. Moreno scanned it, looked at his device, then blinked. "You're in the right seat. There was a reassignment at the gate. It's in the system." Brenda had heard. She stepped forward, trying to recover. "There must be a mistake. I had someone else listed." "No," Moreno said firmly. "Jalen Carter. 12F, it's right here." Silence. The kind of silence that makes people sit straighter. That makes the murmurs stop. That turns recording into witnessing. Jalen didn't smile. Didn't even nod. He just stepped back into the row, placed his backpack beneath the seat, and sat down. Brenda turned and walked briskly toward the galley, lips thin, shoulders tight. A man across the aisle whispered to his wife, "She's gonna regret that." Jalen's heart still raced, but he breathed deep. He texted Uncle Dre. "They know now." Andre responded, "Good. Let me handle the rest." But something had already shifted. This flight wasn't going anywhere, at least, not yet. Not until the people in charge realized who really had control. And Jalen Carter, quiet, respectful, 17, wasn't just another kid with a phone. He was a kid with receipts, resolve, and someone on the other end of the line who knew exactly what to do. Jalen Carter sat in silence, the cabin's recycled air pressing around him, the weight of 50 pairs of eyes still thick on his shoulders. His phone rested in his lap, still warm from the call with his uncle, Andre Carter, civil rights attorney, seasoned litigator, and the man Jalen knew would never let what just happened slide. The flight hadn't moved since it paused on the tarmac, and Jalen could feel the atmosphere shifting from quiet discomfort to something heavier, sharper. Passengers whispered. Phones were still up. Some recorded openly now, Others tucked their devices into the seatbacks in front of them but kept their cameras angled. Jalen didn't move. Didn't gloat. Didn't shrink either. He stayed composed, the way he had been taught. Let the truth sit in the room. It'll do the work, Uncle Dre always said. In the galley, Brenda Halvorsen was still speaking into her walkie, her voice low but tight. Her eyes darted toward Jalen now and then, not with authority anymore, but with something that looked like unease. A different flight attendant, taller, older, with calm in his walk, stepped into the row. The badge on his chest read Luis Moreno. Jalen recognized his face from earlier in the boarding area. Moreno knelt slightly so he wouldn't loom. "Sir," he said gently, "can I scan your boarding pass again, just to verify a few things?" Jalen nodded and handed it over. Moreno took out his device, scanned the barcode, and then checked the screen. His expression didn't change, but there was a subtle pause. His finger hovered. Then a nod. "You were reassigned to 12F at the gate. It's official." He looked down the aisle toward the front of the plane, toward Brenda, then back at Jalen. "You're in the right seat." Brenda Halvorsen had come back partway down the aisle now. "That's not what I have on the manifest," she said sharply. "My sheet still shows another passenger. There was a change," Moreno interrupted firmly. "Last minute at the gate. His name is attached to this seat now." The murmurs came back in waves. Not hushed now, curious, tense, maybe even angry. Jalen sat still, but his heartbeat picked up again, this time with something new, validation. Brenda's lips thinned, and she turned on her heel, storming back toward the galley without a word. But it was too late to contain it. The flight wasn't going to take off without someone being held accountable. And on the ground, Andre Carter was making sure of that. In Houston, Andre was already on his third call, this one directly to Blue Star Airlines' legal team. He stood behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, Bluetooth earpiece flashing, voice low and exact. "We're talking about a minor," he said, pacing. "A 17-year-old black student, quietly asking for confirmation of his assigned seat and being accused of a federal offense by one of your employees. Refused verification. Humiliated. Threatened. In full view of passengers, some of whom are recording. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a liability." The man on the other end tried to respond, but Andre kept going. "If that flight takes off with your employee still on board and no official recognition of wrongdoing, I will file a preliminary injunction for gross civil rights violations before that aircraft even lands. Do you understand me?" The line went quiet. "I'll notify the captain," the lawyer finally said. "Hold the plane." Back inside the aircraft, Jalen caught a flicker of movement at the front. The pilot stepped out of the cockpit, spoke quietly with Brenda, then another uniformed airline supervisor in a navy blazer boarded and made his way down the aisle. 2 airport security officers followed. Passengers leaned into the aisle, phones rising again. The supervisor's face was tight with urgency but composed. He stopped beside Brenda. "Miss Halvorsen," he said, voice clipped, "we need to speak with you at the front of the cabin." Brenda's face didn't change, but her body stiffened. She turned and followed them without looking back. As she passed Jalen's row, she didn't meet his eyes. Didn't offer a word. Just kept walking, escorted by the men who, moments ago, might have been called to remove Jalen instead. A pause. Then a pulse of quiet conversation flowed through the plane. Relief mixed with curiosity. One woman murmured, "It's about time." A college-age guy 2 rows up whispered, "That's the one who tried to get him kicked off." Unreal. Jalen remained still. Not triumphant. Just grounded. This wasn't victory. It was balance being restored. 10 minutes passed. Then the airline supervisor returned alone and walked straight to Jalen. He knelt slightly so he wasn't looming. His voice was sincere, calm. "Mr. Carter," he began, "we sincerely apologize for what you experienced today. The flight attendant involved will not be continuing on this flight. You have done nothing wrong. Jalen looked him in the eye. Why did it take a phone call to be heard? The question hung heavy. The supervisor swallowed. Sometimes, he said, it takes one voice to wake others up. Before he could say more, the captain stepped into the cabin. His voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Due to a personnel matter, we're returning briefly to the gate. We'll resume departure shortly. Feel free to stretch if needed, but please remain near your seats. The cabin didn't move. No one got up. Everyone wanted to see what came next. A younger flight attendant, black, early 20s, nervous, approached Jalen quietly. Hey, she whispered, I just want to say. I saw what happened. That shouldn't have happened to you. Jalen gave her a small nod. Thanks. She hesitated. You handled it better than most adults would have. He didn't know what to say. So he didn't. She gave a small nod and stepped away. The plane eventually began taxiing again. Passengers whispered less now and watched more. The energy had changed, no longer dismissive, but aware. Jalen stared out the window. His hands weren't shaking anymore, but his stomach still felt tight. He texted his uncle, they're removing her. Flight's rolling. Andre replied instantly, good. Sit tight. Let them feel this one. 15 minutes later, another attendant approached with a printed seat reassignment slip. Mr. Carter, she said softly, we'd like to move you to 1A for the rest of the flight. I'm fine here. It's not a reward, she said quickly. We thought you might want some space. It's quieter up front. Jalen paused. He looked around. Some passengers gave small nods. One man raised a fist to his chest in subtle solidarity. The woman from earlier gave him a knowing smile. He stood slowly, picked up his backpack, and moved forward. As he passed each row, he didn't see judgment. He saw something new. Recognition. Quiet support. In the front cabin, he settled into the wide leather seat of 1A. He didn't recline. Didn't relax. He just exhaled slowly and stared forward. The weight of what had just happened still lingered, but the noise around him faded. He knew the storm hadn't passed. In fact, it was only now beginning. Because the plane might have taken off, but the internet never stays grounded. And outside, the world was already watching. By the time the wheels of the plane touched down in Denver, Jalen Carter had received nearly a dozen text messages, all of them unread. He kept his phone face down on the tray table as the flight taxied, not out of pride, not because he didn't care. He just wasn't ready. Not yet. The hours since the incident felt suspended in a blur. The cabin lights, the murmurs, the way people looked at him, some with curiosity, some with quiet respect. Even after being moved to first class, Jalen never truly relaxed. His body had gone still, but his mind stayed tangled in the memory of Brenda Halvorson's voice, sharp and sure, as she tried to erase his presence with a wave of authority. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to shrink him. But it was the first time the world had been watching. As the seatbelt sign dinged and people stood to deplane, Jalen gathered his things slowly. A few passengers in first class gave him small nods or quiet words, nothing loud, just acknowledgement. He didn't know how to respond. He didn't ask for this. Stepping into the jet bridge, the air in Denver felt sharper, colder. Waiting just outside the plane was a Blue Star representative, woman in her 30s, navy blazer, name badge clipped perfectly to her lapel. Her smile was tight, professional. Mr. Carter, she asked. He nodded. We'd like to extend our sincerest apologies on behalf of the airline. And offer you a complimentary voucher for a future flight. Jalen blinked. That's it? Her smile twitched. We're also reviewing internal protocol and will follow up with a formal report. He looked at her, steady. Did you watch the video? She hesitated. Yes. And you're still standing here offering me a voucher like that fixes something? The smile cracked. We're taking this very seriously, I assure you. Jalen didn't respond. He didn't have to. She wasn't saying what needed to be said. Behind her, passengers were still disembarking. Some glanced at him, some didn't. The noise of the airport began to rise around him again, gates calling numbers, toddlers crying, phones buzzing. The world had moved on. But his hadn't. By the time he reached the next gate for his connection to New Orleans, Jalen's phone had buzzed over 30 times. Missed calls from his mom. Texts from friends. Screenshots from Instagram and TikTok, his name trending, clips from the plane gaining traction. He tapped one open and saw himself, standing in the aisle, phone in hand, calm. And then another, the moment security escorted Brenda off. The caption read, "This is how you stand your ground without saying a word." He closed the app and stuffed the phone into his hoodie pocket. At a vending machine near Gate 42, a man in his late 40s approached. Brown coat, worn jeans, kind eyes. "You Jalen Carter?" Jalen nodded, cautious. "Ronell Burke," the man said, offering a hand. "I work in education policy. Saw your video. What you did up there?" That mattered. Jalen shook his hand, unsure what to say. "You didn't yell. You didn't fold. You held your ground. That's bigger than you think." Then the man walked away. No lecture. No fanfare. Just truth. On the next flight, Jalen sat by the window again, another quiet seat, no issues this time. Just the hum of the engine and the low voice of the captain. He kept his phone on airplane mode, forehead leaning gently against the window as clouds drifted past. No one talked to him. No one stared. It was the stillness he had wanted from the beginning. But something inside him had shifted. Not pride. Not anger. Just a deeper understanding. When he landed in New Orleans, his mother was waiting at the baggage claim, arms crossed but eyes soft. She didn't speak at first. Just walked up and hugged him, tight and long, cameras be damned. "You okay?" she finally asked. "I'm good," Jalen answered. "Not great. But good enough to keep going." They drove home in near silence, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel awkward, just full. The kind that holds more meaning than small talk. When they pulled into the driveway, she didn't turn off the car right away. "Your uncle called," she said. "He said you handled it better than some lawyers he's worked with." Jalen gave a faint smile. "He told me not to say anything after I called him, so I didn't." She turned to face him. "That's not easy, baby. Being still when someone's coming for you like that." Jalen stared ahead. "I didn't want to give her a reason." "No," she said softly. "You gave her a chance. She showed everyone who she already was." Inside the house, his little sister had made him a welcome home sign out of construction paper and glitter glue. She didn't understand what had happened, just that something was different. Jalen didn't explain. He just hugged her and said thanks. Upstairs, in his room, he finally turned his phone back on. Dozens of messages. Old friends. Classmates. Teachers. Even people he hadn't spoken to in years suddenly reaching out. Some sent links to news articles. Others said they were proud. A few wrote long messages about how his story reminded them of something they'd lived through but never had the words, or the phone, to fight back with. Jalen didn't reply. Not yet. At school the next week, everything felt slightly off. Not bad. Just shifted. Some classmates gave him high fives. Others whispered. One teacher awkwardly pulled him aside and said, "If you ever want to talk about it, my door's open." Jalen nodded but said nothing. He didn't want to be the kid from the plane. He hadn't asked for this. He just wanted a seat and some silence. But silence didn't mean he hadn't heard what the world had said back to him. Letters began arriving, handwritten ones. A woman from Pittsburgh wrote, "My son is 12. I pray he grows up with the strength you showed. A retired teacher from Kansas said, "You didn't just speak up. You showed up. That matters." Jalen didn't write back. He didn't know what to say yet. But he kept every letter in a shoebox beneath his bed. Meanwhile, Uncle Andre declined every TV interview. He didn't want airtime. He wanted accountability. Blue Star released a statement a few days later, corporate and polished. They called it a miscommunication. Promised to review internal protocol. Thanked Jalen Carter for his grace and cooperation. No apology. No name. No ownership. Andre wrote a rebuttal in a legal journal. It went viral within hours. He wrote, "What happened to my nephew was not a miscommunication. It was a clear reflection of who gets the benefit of the doubt and who doesn't." He was calm. Polite. Patient. That didn't protect him. What protected him was a phone call. And that should disturb everyone reading this. Blue Star's stock dipped the next morning. Jalen saw the headline on a news site, shook his head, and closed the tab. He didn't feel like a hero. Still didn't want to be one. He just wanted peace. But he couldn't ignore the shift. Something had opened. In others. In himself. He started writing again. Not to post, not to share. Just in a notebook. Quiet reflections. A way to process what the world had made so loud. One day, in history class, a kid Jalen barely knew tapped him on the shoulder after the bell rang. "I was on a flight last weekend," the kid said. Guy behind me started yelling about his seat. The flight attendant didn't even flinch, just helped him. No threats. No yelling. Jalen waited. "I thought about you the whole time," the kid added, then walked off. Another time, the school custodian, Mr. Daniels, who'd been there since Jalen was in middle school, caught him by the vending machines. "You made me proud, young man," he said. "Most people don't stay calm when the fire's right in their face." Jalen shrugged. "It didn't feel like calm. It felt like holding my breath." Mr. Daniels nodded. "Still counts." That night, Jalen opened his laptop and clicked New Document. He stared at the blinking cursor and typed. One line, "Sometimes, the loudest protest is choosing not to yell, just stand your ground and stay human." He didn't post it. He just saved it. Because maybe the lesson wasn't about turning into a leader overnight. Maybe it was about recognizing what you carry, how you carry it, and knowing you're not alone. Maybe it was about having someone to call, and being someone others can call when they need to. Maybe it was about speaking up even when your voice shakes, and proving that silence can still carry power when it's grounded in truth. People said Jalen changed that day. But he didn't. He just revealed something the world didn't expect to see. Not anger. Not defiance. Just quiet, steady clarity in the face of ignorance. And sometimes, that's enough to rattle the whole system. As the author of Jalen Carter's story, I want to take a moment to reflect not only on what happened to him aboard that plane, but on what it represents for so many others. Jalen didn't shout. He didn't push back with anger. He didn't turn to aggression when faced with humiliation. Instead, he stood his ground with quiet strength. In a world that often demands volume, Jalen's silence roared. The lesson here is not just about race or airline policy, though those issues are undeniably real and urgent. The deeper message is about dignity. About the power of composure in the face of injustice. Jalen didn't win because he raised his voice. He won because he held onto his truth, even when the world tried to push him aside. We live in a time where people are recorded, judged, and labeled in seconds. Sometimes that spotlight exposes cruelty. Sometimes it sparks change. But what we choose to do when the pressure rises, that's what defines us. So if there's a takeaway from Jalen's journey, let it be this. You don't have to yell to be heard. You don't have to fight to prove you belong. And you don't have to be anyone other than who you are, with grace, strength, and self-respect, even in the hardest moments. To the young people watching this story unfold, especially those who've been overlooked, profiled, or dismissed, know this: your voice matters, even when it shakes. Your presence matters, even when others try to ignore it. And sometimes, the most radical act is simply refusing to move when you've done nothing wrong. And to those in positions of power, teachers, officers, flight crews, supervisors, remember that how you see someone matters. Assumptions carry consequences. Kindness costs nothing, but dignity, once denied, takes much longer to repair. To our viewers and community, thank you for listening. Thank you for caring about stories like this one. At U.S. Instructive Stories, we believe in telling the kinds of stories that don't just entertain, they educate, uplift, and challenge us to do better. If this story moved you, share it. Start conversations. Ask yourself, what would I do if I saw this happen? Would I speak up? Would I stand up? Because change doesn't start in the courtroom or the boardroom. It starts in the aisles of airplanes, in the quiet strength of teenagers, and in everyday people who decide to treat others with the respect they deserve. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing to care. And thank you for believing in stories that remind us what justice, courage, and humanity truly look like. We'll see you in the next story.